One of the other causes that I wanted to mention is scalping. Scalping is something that we sometimes associate with damage to lawns, but we can also see that kind of damage in our hayfields and our pastures. Scalping is when a crop is cut mechanically too close. And that's very, very common with our current styles of hay equipment. When I was growing up, most everyone had a sickle bar mower style for cutting hay. But the disc mower system that it came out several decades ago now is actually much more efficient. There are many positive reasons for using that. But the challenge with using one of those disc mowers is that you can actually cut that crop extremely close. You can make it look like a lawn whenever you exit the hayfield. But that's actually not what you want to try to do. You want to leave a little bit of regrowth there, enough of a leaf blade, enough of a factory there for the crop to regrow back from. When setting up these disc mowers, you need to be careful about the angle at which those blades actually engage the crop. There's a tendency oftentimes for us to try to tilt the blades forward in an attempt to get more of the material if it's laying down or if it's very short. By tilting that forward, we can sometimes get a little bit more material through the cutter bar. But the problem is that like everything else, some folks take it to extremes and they put that at too steep of an angle. And when it's at a too steep of an angle, it does two things. One is that it sometimes will cut into the ground itself and it will kick dirt up into the crop. It can actually increase the ash content of the crop and actually reduce the quality of the overall crop. So it's important not to set those cutter bars such that it's cutting too sharply and too deeply down at the ground. It's also important to make sure that you got the proper shoes on it so that it's lifted up and it's cutting at the right height. Most crops need to be cut at about 2 to 3 inches, somewhere in that neighborhood, depending on the crop species. Another major issue is weed pressure. And this is really something that's not independent of our other causes that we've talked about, because if we look at, for example, this little overgrazed pasture on the far left-hand side here, you can see how short the top growth is and how short the root system is. By comparison, all those things on the right-hand side are the weeds and the other undesirable plants that are in the pasture that the animals are not going to eat. So the competitive advantage then is shifted over toward the weeds. Here's an example of a pasture that you can see in the background. Much of that pasture is actually being taken over by dog fennel. And there's also a substantial amount of crabgrass. In fact, the light green material right in the middle of the slide is actually the only little bit of common Bermuda grass that's left in this particular field. Everything else is either crabgrass, dog fennel, or some other type of weed. When the rains do come and we begin to come out of the drought, the very first thing that responds to that, of course, is going to be the weeds. And the weeds can, because they are have a much better root system, they're much better able to take advantage of that moisture, they may actually get up above and shade out the crop, the desirable grass crop that's growing underneath it. Another related cause of stand loss is actually insect pressure. Now, sometimes we think of insect pressure as being just temporary, and most of the time it is rather temporary. But insect pressure can actually be an additional stressor that causes some real problems for our crops. In the northeast part of Georgia, we've been having some real problems with sugarcane beetles. Sugarcane beetle grubs actually are in the ground, particularly where we've had a lot of poultry litter or livestock manure applied over the years. And in those areas, they do a lot of soil disturbance, they do a lot of feeding of the root system, and really cause some major problems to those stands. But unfortunately, that is oftentimes thought of as being the real problem, but the reality is that it's usually an after effect of some of these other causes that I've already mentioned. The final thing that I wanted to mention is the cutting of our crops too late into the season, and in particular Bermuda grass. Oftentimes I see folks out cutting hay much later into the season than what they really need to be doing that. They're trying to get the last little bit for the year or to clean up the hayfield going into the winter. This is a picture that I took actually from our university farms, and one of the hayfields there is cut usually in the fall, and the students are actually encouraged to go out and decorate some of the hay bales. You can see the timing of this cutting is right around Halloween, the October time of the year. The leaves in the background are beginning to change. And this is actually not a terrible time of going out and cutting hay. That's actually a pretty good time. Ideally for us, we want to be within about 2 weeks of the first frost, or after, within about a week or so after the first frost, to take that last cutting of hay. The reason for that is that enables us to maintain a certain level of carbohydrates and reserves in the plant going through the winter, and it helps with winter dormancy, winter hardiness, and spring green up as well. It also has a major positive effect on the weed pressure that is exerted on that stand going through the winter. If we can keep a little bit of growth out there that is frosted on or right up to frost, we can prevent many of those winter annuals from germinating, or at least slow them down from germinating. So that is some of the major problems that we've been seeing with stand loss. There are many, many others, but oftentimes the stand loss that we've been seeing is coming from one of these 10 characteristics, or most often actually a combination of several of these. So I encourage you to take a look at what's going on in your operation and in your area with regard to these stressors that are occurring, and what level they are exerting pressure on your stands.